In 2013, news headlines sent a wave of panic across America. Krokodil, the most frightening drug in the world, had reportedly arrived on U.S. shores. This was the same drug that had already devastated Russia, leaving its victims with rotting flesh, exposed bones, and a gruesome fate that seemed like something out of a horror movie. So what happened when Krokodil went stateside? Find out in today's episode of the Infographics Show. What does Krokodil do to your body? Our story begins in remote rural Russia, a landscape of cold, desolate towns where the bleakness of everyday life could drive anyone to seek an escape. The year was 2011. A British documentary crew found themselves deep in Siberia, spending time with teenagers squatting in abandoned apartment blocks. The scene was grim. Filthy, decaying rooms littered with used hypodermic needles and the air thick with cigarette smoke. They were caught in the grip of a heroin epidemic ravaging deindustrialized towns and cities, places seemingly forgotten by the government. But the heroin, most of it coming through Central Asia from Afghanistan, was expensive. What they needed was something cheaper but packed the same punch. Well, as the history of illicit drugs shows us, where there's demand, there is always supply. This came in the form of Krokodil, a toxic cocktail of chemicals with ingredients that could include battery acid, eye drops, and paint thinner. It should come as no surprise that when regular users of Krokodil injected it into their arms, feet, neck, or other extremities, the substances could seriously damage the tissue around the injection site. The skin would become scaly, hence the name Krokodil, which means crocodile. The necrosis left users with body parts that looked like they'd been ravaged by flesh-eating insects, their bones painfully exposed beneath decayed, peeling tissue. These wounds were like nothing the world had ever seen, traumatic reminders of the most severe consequences of drug addiction. Almost immediately, the media was warning us that Krokodil had already started the long march to Western Europe and America. The drug was cheap with a capital C. Anyone with an acumen for business could manufacture it in their kitchen without the need of any specialized equipment. In fact, the main ingredients were readily available at any hour from Russia's 24-hour pharmacies. Before long, Krokodil was flooding the streets, selling for a mere few dollars, a fraction of the cost of $20 a bag of heroin. The primary ingredient was caffeine, an over-the-counter cold medicine that contains a combination of caffeine, paracetamol, propionate, and codeine phosphate sesquilhydrate. You can forget everything but the codeine. It's the codeine in this mix that transforms it into a deadly high. While the cook is buying the caffeine, they'll also get some tropicamide, the drug in eye drops used to dilate the pupil for diagnostic procedures. After the eye drops comes the rough stuff, some formic acid that can be bought at any hardware store. If formic isn't available, sulfuric will suffice. Even battery acid and drain cleaner have been used. Last but not least is the gasoline, easy to acquire from a gas station. If the cook can't be bothered leaving the hardware store, paint thinner or lighter fluid will also do the job. All of these ingredients can be purchased in under an hour for so very little money. For an entrepreneur, this is what you might call a lean, mean, bootstrap business, and the cooking part doesn't take much skill at all. As long as you know the right amounts, you can boil it up or roast it, and what's left can be emptied into a syringe and mainlined into a vein. From starting up the cooking to loading the syringe, the whole process could take just 10 to 45 minutes. The gasoline isn't in there to get someone high, and neither is the acid. The gasoline acts as a solvent, breaking down the ingredients to extract the codeine, while the acid transforms the codeine into desomorphine, a substance 8 to 10 times more potent than morphine, which is already about 10 times stronger than codeine. So some enterprising kid with a few rubles and a makeshift lab can cook up a drug strong enough to make even the most hardened opiate addict nod off. Whether desomorphine gives a better high than heroin is not clear. Pharmaceutical-grade stuff might, but when a 17-year-old's cooking it up in his kitchen, let's just say there isn't much quality control going on to check the potency. Nonetheless, the facts show us that this homemade desomorphine works, and it works well, which is why in 2011 the Russian authorities seized about 65 million doses of it. And it didn't just take off in Russia. It was also found in Ukraine and then reportedly spread to Georgia, Kazakhstan, the Czech Republic, and other Eastern European nations. As for the US, the biggest drug-consuming country in the world, we'll come to that later. But what are the eye drops for? The answer is an extra kick. When misused, tropicamide in the drops can have a psychoactive effect. So the warm blanket of opioid relief comes with a side of trippiness. In high doses, it can cause slurred speech, tremors, convulsions, and hallucinations. You might wonder why anyone would take this. Well, it gets them high, and people, especially broken people, really want that. The lamest rush gets stronger, said an addict, who explained that when you mix tropicamide with an opiate, the whole package packs a serious punch. A paper on the matter said, "The brain is paralyzed, memory disappears, and for a traumatized addict, that is what you might call hitting the sweet spot. But too much tropicamide and your mind is gone," with one user describing what he said were devils creeping around and not being able to distinguish the hallucinations from reality. You might even think you could solve, quote, "all the riddles of the universe," but the high doesn't last forever. According to these tropicamide philosophers, you might come down with a great big thud, a killer headache, and a few missing hours you can't quite explain. To the average person, it sounds like a very bad idea. However, to an oblivion-seeking addict in Russia, it seemed like the deal of a lifetime, sometimes quite literally a lifetime. The problem is in the shooting up part. Believe it or not, the human body isn't a big fan of gasoline consumption. In 2022, a 22-year-old man in the US tried shooting up pure gasoline because, well, he wasn't very happy. He later said he felt the inside of his arm freezing and what felt like ice in his lungs. He survived, but not before he suffered internal organ damage and necrosis of the flesh. We don't need to tell you that whacking up petrol should be on your never-to-do bucket list. Obviously, Crocodile users aren't putting pure gasoline directly into their veins, but the gasoline and other toxic residues are still in the mixture with the desomorphine. It eventually has an effect on the body. As for what happens in the brain of a Crocodile user, it's similar to what happens when someone takes heroin, but with that extra hallucinatory blast of eye drops. Because opiates work on opioid receptors that regulate pain, taking them feels like being super relaxed and covered in a pain-numbing heated blanket. That blanket doesn't just numb bodily pains, it's as if all of your problems, your trauma, dissipates in a puff of smoke. For the homeless and the traumatized, these drugs really hit the spot. They're like magic bullets that kill the harsh reality of life, but they come with a high cost. Being a desomorphine addict is even harder work than being a morphine or a heroin addict. It has a very short half-life, which means it leaves your body fast. Users need another hit to stave off withdrawal symptoms, which can appear in just 2 hours. In case studies, consistently shooting up desomorphine can cause damage to tissue, thanks to all the toxic byproducts. Blood vessels, muscle, and bone can be damaged as well as skin and flesh. Abscesses can start to form, blood clots can occur, and then comes the gangrene, necrosis, and an infection that might mean amputation. And if that is not scary enough, the research papers note cases of pneumonia, meningitis, death of bone tissue, neurologic injury, liver injury, renal impairment, and death. One research journal mentioned a 27-year-old woman who said that she'd been injecting Crocodile for 5 to 6 months after several years of regular street opioid abuse. After each hit, she'd notice her skin turn black and blue around the injection site. This would scab after 2 to 3 days, so she injected in another vein and came back to the scab territory later. But then after many hits, lots of little scabs turned into one big piece of black necrotic tissue. And this woman wasn't just one of the forsaken Siberians living in a Russian hellhole. She was from New York. The journal said it was the first case in New York of someone experiencing the flesh-eating effects of Crocodile. After all, who in the USA can't get hold of cold meds, eye drops, and gasoline? And then there was the case of the 2 sisters in Illinois, who in 2013 ended up in the media as a mortality tale of what happens when you take bargain basement drugs. They claimed they didn't know they were using Crocodile until their legs and arms took on a very crocodile-y appearance. Despite their injuries going down to the bone, after treatment they both kept their limbs. They explained that when they started doing this drug, they couldn't believe how good it was compared to the other opioids they'd been using. It was much stronger than the heavily cut heroin on the streets, and it was cheaper. They thought they had hit the jackpot until they started rotting. And that was when one of their friends sent the message that said, "Crocodile, look it up." The DEA then helped kick off a moral panic when the agency warned that several patients had been treated for Crocodile injuries at the same hospital where the girls were treated. That panic continued as media reports talked about Crocodile injuries in Missouri, Arizona, and Cleveland. Over in Europe, Crocodile had seemingly spread to Poland, Germany, France, Belgium, Sweden, and Norway. We'll just say here that the media doesn't always let the facts get in the way of a good tale, and some of the Crocodile stories in the West could have just been contaminated heroin cases. That doesn't mean Crocodile wasn't huge in Russia. It was, but the cases of it appearing in the West might have been exaggerated or misinformed. Before we talk about the present state of Crocodile, let's look at the withdrawals. As you know, it has a short half-life, so you might get cravings within a matter of a few hours. The beginning stage of withdrawal often starts with your eyes watering and you can't stop yawning. We won't get too technical, We'll just say this about your autonomic nervous system going into overdrive: it's just the start. After 24 hours, you're getting stomach cramps and your arms and legs won't stop twitching. Every inch of you feels out of balance, like you can't stand to be in your own skin. You don't sleep that night. Instead, you toss and turn, and you're visited by regret, trauma, and the many demons you've been hiding from inside your protective shell. You throw up time and again. Watery diarrhea leaks out of you. You consider just one last hit, and you can do the withdrawal after that. But no, this time you're gonna do it. 2 days in, you're still writhing in bed, feeling as low as you can get. Cold sweat is dripping into the pillow you now realize is filthy and stinks. It's as if you just realized how dirty everything is, how dirty you are. You're a waste to mankind. You're the biggest loser in the world. It feels like there's no escape, but if you just hold on. Days 3 and 4 are really tough, maybe the worst, but day 5 is a little bit better. You're still in the hole, but on day 6 you stand up and open the curtains. There's a world out there that you've been hiding from. Outside your protective shell, it seems to look different, smell different, and you now notice the small things. You feel like calling your mom, your sisters, and your brothers, but you've let them down so much. You start crying like a child. What have you done to them? And for many addicts in post-withdrawal, they experience the most crushing depression. This is because their brains stopped making as much dopamine while the drug supplied it. It's as if every dopamine receptor in the brain has died. It might take another week, a month, or more, but the sun will come out and that black hole will disappear. You start to smile. You feel human again. You're no longer a slave shackled to this incredibly demanding drug. No more knocking on doors in dangerous neighborhoods at 4 in the morning. No more lying to the people who love you. It's over. But as we said with Crocodil, you've also got the tropicamide in the eye drops to withdraw from. A paper on the matter said that the person will experience anxiety, sweating, nausea and vomiting, muscle stiffness, and tremors. The anxiety might hit critical levels on day 7, just when the opiate withdrawals are starting to calm down. Still, the good news is some patients said the eye drop withdrawal actually lessened the intensity of the opiate withdrawal. But the problem is that 20 to 30 days after the patients got off of the opioid, some still craved tropicamide. Desomorphine is still abused today. Most users go after the pharmaceutical-grade version rather than a toxic witch's brew cooked up by someone who doesn't mind selling you battery acid. Crocodile never really took off in the West, and for good reason. Unlike the desperate kids in Siberia, even the most hardened addicts here tend to think twice before injecting a bottom-shelf cocktail of toxic chemicals. What do you think is the most terrifying part about Crocodile? And why do you think some people turn to such a dangerous drug? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you think Crocodile is crazy, you should watch Insane Drugs You Didn't Know Existed. Or for all you patriots out there, have a look at what happens to your body when smoking crack.